Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the EU Spectator, the podcast that brings you in-depth analysis and insightful commentary on the latest development within the European Union. I'm your host, Catalin Gabriel Done, and as always, I'm thrilled to have with me my friend Nick Zalewski, an expert in European affairs and a regular guest on our show. Nick's deep knowledge and nuanced perspectives on the EU matters make him an invaluable contributor to our discussion. Nick, welcome back to our podcast.
Thanks for having me, and everyone make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on the notification bell, and also go ahead and comment whether you agree or disagree with what we say in the video.
Sure. Nick, in today's episode, we have a picked agenda covering three crucial topics that are currently shaping the landscape of the European Union. First, we'll dive into the new EU Parliament legislature, examining the shifts in political power and what they mean for the future and for the future policy and governance. And the recent elections have brought significant changes, and we will break down the implication of these shifts for both member states and the broader EU agenda. Next, we will turn our attention to the election of Ursula von der Leyen for a second term as President of the European Commission. I hope we will discuss her first term achievements and challenges and what her re-election signifies for the EU's future direction. Ursula von der Leyen leadership has been pivotal during a transformative period for the EU, and we will explore the key issues and the strategies that are likely to define this second term. And finally, we will address the ongoing and continuous topic of migration and integration policy within the European Union. This issue remains a critical point of negotiation and debate among member states, and we will analyze the last developments and potential solutions being proposed by the new EU political groups in the European Parliament. Migration and integration, as you know, are not just policy issues, but also touch on fundamental questions about the EU's identity and values, making this a particularly vital discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned as we unpick this important issue with Nick Zalewski, whose insights and expertise will provide you with a deeper understanding of the current and future state of the European Union. Whether you're a seasoned EU watcher or just beginning to explore the EU affairs, this episode promises to deliver valuable perspectives and thought-provoking analysis. So, Nick, the recent elections for the European Parliament have ensured a new legislature marked by significant shifts in political power and alliances. The European People's Party remains the largest political group, but with a reduced majority, necessitating a broader coalition and more complex negotiations to pass legislation. The Socialists and Democrats, the S&D group, have also seen the changes in their representation, serving to maintain their influence, aims growing competition from other parties like the Greens. Meanwhile, the Greens have made notable gains, but reflecting increasing voter concern about environmental issues and pushing climate policy to the forefront of the EU agenda. And this new balance of power presents both challenges and opportunities. The EPP will need to navigate its leadership role carefully, finding finding common grounds with the S&D and the Greens to build effective coalition. This dynamic, I think, could lead to more inclusive and comprehensive policies, as diverse viewpoints are considered and integrated. But however, it also means that compromises and negotiations will be crucial, potentially slowing down the legislative process as parties work to reconcile differing priorities and ideologies. To gain a deeper understanding of these developments, I'd like to ask you, Nick, how do you see the EPP strategy evolving in this new legislative, given their need to collaborate more closely with the other parties to secure majorities?
It's not going to go well for them very well at all. I mean, we're essentially going to see just very broad legislation, a lot of stalemates when parties can't seem to agree, is partially because there's such drastically different visions of Europe. I mean, the S&D, the Greens just seem to be stuck in an alternate reality and don't want to address the reality that the European Union cannot address climate change at all. It's not the role of Europe to save the environment to the detriment of the quality of life for Europeans with the Green Deal. And then at the same time, you're just going to have a lot of issues that a lot of parties are not going to be able to agree on, similar with migration. I mean, same with S&D and the Greens, they just seem to be in an alternate reality, ignoring the challenges with that. And then just with, you know, but it'll be interesting to see if citizens start to push back. I mean, it's a little interesting seeing a lot of countries suffering with 40-degree plus weather. So for Americans, that's like 90s, 100-degree Fahrenheit. And the attitude of what the Greens is, oh, just suffer. Suffer for the environment. I mean, okay. How, you know, it's the harsh reality that Europeans slowly will be needing more and more air conditioning compared to the past. Especially if they're, you know, for the safety. And that's the funny thing to me is how often we would see with some people in Europe during the pandemic. Oh, for the safety, we have to do these strict lockdowns. While you see heat waves that could kill more people per day than the COVID-19 did. No comment, no nothing, no acceptance that air conditioning needs to be expanded for the safety of people. I mean, you look. Luckily, you see different national governments like Greece taking steps such as temporarily closing the Acropolis at times when the heat's too strong. Because in reality, we don't want a repeat of Saudi Arabia with the Hajj. For people unaware, that's one of the pillars of Islam when they do the pilgrimage to Mecca. And the videos from that were horrifying. I don't know if you personally saw them yourself on X, but just body after body with their face covered. And that's it. Just with how many bodies there were to remove because of the huge heat wave, and there wasn't enough cooling stations, unfortunately, along the way. That's possibly going to be the future of Europe too, if they don't agree on something. And just, it's almost, the issue that we're seeing is that the European Union is concerned of working with these parties that have been automatically labeled far right. So they'll work with parties who can't agree on anything. I mean, I honestly see the European People's Party agreeing more with some of the more conservative parties than S&D and the Greens. Because to a certain point, the European People's Party seems to be more based in reality than S&D and the Greens, that we need to strengthen the economy to achieve different objectives. I mean, you can't talk about the green transition and looking for cleaner energy sources if you don't have the money to finance it. And now we're getting to the point that that's becoming the issue. If we just have these political parties who don't focus on the economy, well, what are you going to have to finance any of these more lofty goals that come second? If you don't have the resources, you can't do anything to achieve these goals.
I agree with
And
you. I agree with you, but let's look a little bit at what happened with the EU Parliament political groups, because the Greens are the biggest loser of these
yeah,
elections, but they they are succeeding to increasing their influence during the negotiations with Ursula von der Leyen and with the EPP for the president, for the next president of the EU Commission. Ursula von der Leyen will keep her position. But how do you anticipate the green political group impact on environmental and climate policies within the EU, and what challenges do you foresee in aligning their goals with those of the EPP and SD?
they're definitely going to try to strong arm it, unfortunately, where you're going to definitely see them try to demand adoption and progress for the Green Deal quicker than is possible. But at the same time, it'll be interesting to see if the European People's Party goes along with it, or if you just kind of see where there's these agreements, oh yeah, we'll try to make progress, and then as many things go, it just kind of gets swept under the rug. And while, because that's also the thing that a lot of Americans don't necessarily realize, is that the European Union and political parties in the EU, whether if it's in the European Parliament or in their national parliaments, they love making these broad, big, bold declarations, and then they don't necessarily make progress towards it. And then they'll do something much more conservative behind the scenes and realize, okay, this green legislation isn't practical. And then they don't make the progress that they claim they would in order to woo the media and journalists into getting good publicity. And that kind of comes up later then where people realize, well, wait a minute, you said this, this, and this, and then you did the opposite almost. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And potentially I almost see the European People's Party moving away from the Greens after a while and working with some of the more conservatives, considering as they keep as the Greens keep on not doing very well in elections, and with just how unpractical they are about their demands, I just don't see it working very well necessarily.
But a Romanian member of European Union Parliament just shared some thoughts on Facebook, and he said that, in his opinion, the Greens should be replaced from the right position to the left of SD. What do you think about this? Are the Greens more much closer to the communists or not?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, with their rhetoric where it's just not based in reality at all. I mean, it's a little bizarre to try to pretend they're a bit more conservative when they're not in any sense, really. I mean, it just, to be blunt, it almost seems sometimes with these green politicians, they almost expect people to just, oh, sacrifice yourself for the environment. Okay, how is that not much more far left than we pretend it is? I mean, it's just not practical, their demands at all. And the issue is they don't seem to be taming that legislation. There's already been articles published discussing this, saying that there's going to be infighting about the green agenda, about the greening of Europe, because the fact is, while the European People's Party may have made nice with them for now in order to not work with some of the more conservative parties, it's not going to go well in the end because the European People's Party is going to realize, well, okay, we can't make these wishes of the Greens a reality, and the Greens are going to get upset. And I just don't see them coming back to the reality, especially when we see the activism from the more environmental activists that we see in Europe, with how they have no issue with just potentially damaging cultural monuments, artwork, etc.
Mhm.
I mean, it was sad how yesterday there was a conference I attended, and you could see that the security guards were so nervous about people having backpacks to the conference because it was partially by some artwork, luckily all in glass cases, but even the fact that they were all in glass, you know, anyone with the backpack, they made sure that they did not go anywhere near because they knew that there was a risk that someone was potentially carrying paint or something and would try, or even a hammer, as we've seen in the UK. Uh, and they try, you know, just trying to chisel it. I mean, these just, they're not based in reality. And that's the issue that unfortunately, that's your typical, that's a lot of the people who will then go and vote for the Greens, is people who believe that it's okay to take some of these extreme actions that really aren't beneficial because they drive people away from the cause. And let's, you know, and that's what I think really hurt the Greens in this past election was these activists who go block traffic, don't let people go to work, try to damage these historic and cultural monuments or artwork.
Okay.
That did them in, especially if you don't have the Green politician saying, no, you can't do that. That's not beneficial in order to achieve your political aims. And let's be realistic. Have you really ever seen a Green politician denounce uh, any of this? No. It just seems like they might try to distance themselves, but at the same time, it hurts them in the long run, then. And unless they actually come out and say, maybe we shouldn't be as extreme with this, you're not going to gain any potential voter base back to them.
Okay. But so I'm trying to understand what you say means that based on the results of the re-election of Ursula von der Leyen as president of the EU Commission, seems like we will have 5 years of green conservative agenda, because even if the Greens lost a lot of their previous seats in the European Parliament, they succeed to put on the EU Commission agenda some hot issues for them, and maybe Ursula von der Leyen will try to implement that green policies. So we voted. The question is if the Europeans voted for a conservative agenda or for a green agenda.
Well, and that's the issue, and it's shameful and pitiful of von der Leyen, where you had Georgia Maloney willing to work with her, but it almost seems like, oh my gosh, us taking a stance, a harsh stance against illegal immigration. Oh, we can't do that. You know, I hope the next election, the European People's Party loses horrifically. Shame on them for essentially possibly shoving this green agenda down people's throat when this isn't their main concern. The fact that the Greens lost so much support, it signifies that this isn't the top priority. When Europeans are still struggling with inflation, they can't afford to care about the environment. We see so many European Union member states where people are choosing to put off having kids because they can't afford it. And instead of helping families gain spending power, what, we're going to work on making everything more expensive for them, while countries like China don't do anything to protect the environment? Uh, and not only that, but the issue too is if we keep on potentially making manufacturing more expensive to do in Europe, companies are just going to flee elsewhere. And then you're going to see a job loss in Europe only for products to then be produced in countries with little to no environmental regulations. How is that beneficial to the environment then? The reality is that we have to find a balance, and whether people like that or not. And that seems to be the unfortunate thing with the Green parties throughout Europe, is that they don't want to accept that they can't get everything they want because of the fact that companies can freely shut down their production in Europe and go abroad, as we've seen in many member states in the past, with how much European economies no longer rely as much on manufacturing as they did before. Same with the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just have it go abroad where they have nothing. Well, and similar to that, where a lot of people are upset with the United States with energy.
Yeah.
The fact that we don't necessarily drill for oil at home, instead we depend on countries in the Middle East for our energy. Okay, none of them are really saying how they care about the environment. What environmental protections are they doing?
Exactly.
The Green parties seem to enjoy shooting themselves in the foot to say, oh, well, we achieved this, and then they didn't because it doesn't actually have a net positive effect on the world if you simply moved manufacturing or energy production from Europe and the US, where there's at least some environmental protections, to nations that do not care at all and are 100% committed to doing whatever they can to exploit resources, even if it is to only earn a penny. And that's the main issue that we're going to see, is that it's not going to necessarily be positive. And, and it's just like, it's just so bizarre that you essentially have this because, but she almost talks out of both sides of her mouth, because it almost seems that that was one of the main things that Giorgia Meloni was pushing for, was cracking down on illegal immigration through the Mediterranean Sea. But if you Google, von der Leyen was having stronger migration rhetoric before the election. And now after the election, she now turns back to being a mush and not committed to doing anything about it. Where it basically seems like she said what she needed to do in order to not have a complete disintegration of the European People's Party voting base, only to trick voters, because now she's not actually committed to doing what she was talking about. Because Giorgia Meloni is 100% correct. We need to slow down illegal immigration through the Mediterranean Sea. Not everyone is an asylum seeker. And we see the harsh reality in Italy. When you see illegal immigrants in piazzas who never get stopped by the police to actually check if they have documents to be there or not, who are then threatening Italian citizens. I think that's one of the worst things that I see personally in Italy. One, you see people trying to get to the train station.
Mm-hmm.
Their suitcase accidentally bumps into something that these illegal immigrants are illegally trying to sell on the sidewalk. They have no permit. They have no permission to have these open street markets with just throwing things they collected from the trash on blankets. And heaven forbid, if an Italian woman accidentally bumps these items collected from the trash with their suitcase,
mm-hmm.
they get violent with them, where they then grab their suitcase. And you could tell the look on the face with you could see the look on their face that they didn't mean to.
Yeah, and this always happened in our cities, in our country. And in this context, I think that Ursula von der Leyen's re-election for a second term as president of the European Commission marks a significant moment in EU politics. And in my opinion, it was a mistake, because her first term was characterized by numerous and various challenges, including navigating the COVID-19 pandemic, addressing climate change, and managing complex relations.
Yeah, but let's also not forget her corruption. When people, the fact that She refused to turn over her phone records when she was talking to these drug companies, who it turns out that there were side effects with their shots.
Right.
She
And
refuses to turn over the text messages. Oh, they got lost. So she has a horrible track record.
right. And the
Europeans
EU
are
court,
not better off than they were at the start of her term. And now they're not going to be any better off if she continues to work with Greens who have no interest in improving the quality of life. And instead have this bizarre belief almost that it's better if there's less Europeans.
for me, it was a shock to see the Greens supporting this new term of Ursula von der Leyen, because they are the champions, the athletes of the fighting against corruption within the European Union. And you're right, the EU Court of Justice decision underscored concerns about transparency and accountability within the EU institution. And critics argue that von der Leyen's election process lacks a sufficient democratic legitimacy, a sentiment held by some members of the European Parliament. And
But
this
unfortunately,
decision,
this almost shows that it's easier to fight against corruption when you're in the opposition. But the
Mhm.
Greens showed that they're just like any other political party, that once they're able to gain power, then their morals go out the window. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing, where, it's easy when you're in the opposition to demand perfection from the ruling political parties, but then when you join yourself,
Mhm.
oh, it is what it is. That's how government works. And it
Not
just shows
really.
that they're not dedicated to their values.
Yeah, not really, because it's about liberal democracy. And in this context, I think von der Leyen's ability to garner support among parliamentary groups will be crucial. And she must navigate the delicate balance of passing her critics while continuing to push forward her policy agenda. Okay, her policy agenda, because we know that it's not her agenda. And this requires addressing the concern raised by the EU Court of Justice, and rebuilding trust among her colleagues and the wider European the European citizens. And the coming months will be, I think, will be critical as von der Leyen works to consolidate her position and ensure her leadership. It's seen as both legitimate and effective. But considering the EU Court of Justice decision against von der Leyen, how democratic do you believe her re-election as president of the European Commission was, and what implications does this have for the EU's democratic process?
It's only going to worsen for the European Union. You're going to see a continual increase in mistrust of the European Union, and you're going to see an increase in people voting for more Eurosceptic political parties in the next election. So while the European Union may have a reprisal from this for the next 5 years until the next election, it's only going to continue to get worse for them, because as we've seen with different political parties such as Le Pen and Bardelas in France, their support continues to increase. And that's what we're going to see, especially when different problems, the mainstream political parties refuse to solve. They refuse to address migration. They refuse to address immigrants who are not,
They refuse to discuss.
that refuse to integrate, who need to be deported if they refuse to respect European laws and values. And it's only going to get worse for political parties like that. Because the funniest thing is that for the longest time, we always heard that, well, if Italy votes for a political party such as Fratelli d'Italia with Meloni, oh, then that just destroys your future. There's not going to be anything. And you're realizing, no, as more and more EU member states are voting for parties that are pushing to address some of these key issues that politicians like von der Leyen have failed again and again to address. such as this illegal immigration that's negatively impacting the safety of European Union citizens, the integrity of the Schengen area,
Mm-hmm.
you're just going to continue to see their power increase where, it's funny because all of a sudden, all that discourse around Italy, well, Italy destroyed itself because it voted for Maloney. All of a sudden, that just quietly went away
Right.
as no, because these political parties are able to for push more on the EPP, and it seems like that their support is potentially going to grow, especially if the Greens and EPP and the SD are unwilling to change their positions, which is a bit bizarre looking at Denmark, because Denmark,
All right.
it's a center left wing government
Mm-hmm.
that agrees with the citizens and their demands that, hey, we can't allow illegal immigration. We can't allow immigration that is of people who refuse to respect Danish values
Mm-hmm.
and legislation.
Right.
And it's, which is a bit funny because even though in many ways this mirrors different right wing parties, you don't see the media trying to say, oh, well, this is an extremist party. Because, oh, well, it's center left, so okay, we'll let it slide. We won't criticize them. I mean, could you imagine if some of these other political parties, such as Le Pen or Maloney, demanded legislation saying that you can't wave foreign flags as much as now you can't in Denmark? It's the
Yeah.
media quietly reported on that and didn't do anything as they would, because if you would have had some of these, or even Orban, if Orban would have done that, my gosh, you would have been having every single media station screaming fascism, fascism. Denmark does it. Okay, it quietly gets presented, and then they let it disappear quickly into the next news cycle.
Mm-hmm. And because you mentioned that, I think that we should talk a little bit about this issue about migration and integration policy, because migration and integration have been pivotal in the recent negotiations surrounding Ursula von der Leyen's re-election as president of the European Commission. And these topics are highly contentious, often polarizing member states and testing the EU's commitment to unity and shared values. But you mentioned very well the situation in Denmark and Italy. But migration, in particular, remains a deeply divisive issue with differing perspectives on how best to manage and integrate newcomers within the European Union. And I really think that von der Leyen's first term as president of EU Commission saw significant efforts to address these challenges, but it was not enough, because the EU asylum system, it's not working. However, achieving a consensus has proven difficult, with some countries advocating for stricter controls and others pushing for more humanitarian approaches. And in this context, how do you think the von der Leyen's stance on migration and integration influenced her re-election negotiation, and what compromises were necessary to secure support for different member states?
Well, I don't think she really made many compromises because she went more with S&D and the Greens, where it is what it is, where they're not really concerned about cracking down on illegal immigration. I mean, if she actually was going to create a more practical approach, crack down on illegal immigration, she would have been talking more with the political parties that made that a big campaign issue that a lot of Europeans voted for. Instead, she made it with S&D and the Greens, where, and the EPP itself, you're seeing their support continuing to shrink because Europeans are getting upset with them for refusing to ever deal with the issue. And it's only going to get worse when you have member states such as her own, Germany, where she comes from.
Mm.
It's very bizarre to me how different member states, if you have someone who turns out to not be a refugee, they do not get any protected status, and then they don't get deported. It's, oh, well, you're supposed to leave the country. You're
Yeah.
talking about someone who entered the European Union illegally under the false guise that, oh, I'm a refugee. And then it turns out there's no evidence, there's no proof of this. And then you're going to expect them to just casually leave on their own? How stupid are these governments to think that this policy was ever going to work? And now you're seeing typical German citizens suffering with it when they're getting stabbed
Mm-hmm.
constantly in Germany. In 1 month, you had 14 stabbing incidences. Come on. This is only going to get worse because they're not addressing the issue of you need deportations of people who were not granted refugee status, who are not allowed to stay. But instead, you're having judicial systems becoming activists for illegal immigrants rather than their own citizens, where you're seeing them commit crimes. Where, first of all, if you enter a nation illegally, you already broke the law. But then, too, you're having some of these vicious uh, attacks on women occur or violent robberies.
Mm-hmm.
But then you'll have these judicial systems in many member states, such as Germany or France, almost playing activists where, oh, well, we can't charge them harshly. Uh, okay, and how is this benefiting anyone? If you don't say, hey, everyone has to respect the law in this nation,
Right.
you're encouraging the same thing to occur because people who are in the same situation as these illegal immigrants realize, oh, I could break the law and nothing will happen to me because I'll just go before a judge and they'll say, oh, well, they can't be expected to follow the law, which is
Yeah.
absurd because, as I mentioned, I could have sworn I mentioned this in the previous podcast episode. When you look at some of the nations a lot of these immigrants are coming from, they could potentially be facing the death penalty. They
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be allowed to commit these crimes back home, but they realize it's different in the European Union, that in many ways, whether von der Leyen likes it or not, her, the Greens, the S&Ds, they are racist because they have lower expectations for illegal immigrants who are not white Europeans. They think they're not smart enough to realize, oh, well, you need to follow laws. You're not allowed to rape women. You're not allowed to viciously rob people. It's just, oh, well, they come from a different culture. Okay. And these cultures in Africa, the Middle East, they don't put up with this either. If some of this is allowed to occur, it's because they don't have a central government. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowing it to occur. It's not.
Yeah, right. And
It's just a
we have
racism
the
of low
same,
expectations.
yeah, we have the same principles here and in Africa and in the Middle East. So uh, the, I think that as von der Leyen embarks on her second term, the pressure to deliver tangible results on migration and integration, it's immense, and she must navigate complex political landscape now and address the concerns of various stakeholders.
Which I don't know if she really will, because as you
Yeah.
know, this is her term limit where she won't be able to become the president of the European Commission again, where 2 terms and you're out. So for her, it is what it is. She gets her nice, highly paid job. She gets to leave a disaster behind her if she's not able to successfully address it. And then, of course, because she's former president of the European Commission, she'll probably find some company that's willing to pay her a high
Mhm.
salary afterwards. So it really doesn't matter to her. You're
Right.
just going to, and this is the same, unfortunately, where when people talk about, wow, why is there a rise in mistrust of the European Union? Because there seems to be an unwillingness to address the problems. And I'm sure that we're going to see that unless we see a dramatic change with the European People's Party, the Greens, and the S&D to crack down and actually do what a lot of European Union citizens believe in, which even a lot of European People Party voters believe in cracking down on illegal immigration.
Right, but what strategies do you believe von der Leyen and the new Commission should adopt in this second term to effectively address migration and integration issues? And how can von der Leyen force a greater unity among member states and on this critical topic?
She would be looking more to work on strengthening the external borders of the European Union and Schengen area. But unfortunately, I don't know if we'll see that, because it seems that this was almost rhetoric that she was probably willing to support around the election, where she said what she needed to do in order to get the EPP to win the election. But now it seems to be up in the air and it's almost hard to say, because we almost have to watch, because it's almost interesting looking at Britain and how Labour was with the election, where it seemed to definitely be much more far left almost before the election. But then after the election, it almost seems that Labour is actually turning around and potentially being much more towards the center than it proposes of the election. So it's almost this wait and see game. And whether people want to admit it or not, no political analyst has a crystal ball. None of us could predict the future, so it almost seems that while we could take statements from these politicians for face value on what they campaigned on, we'll actually have to wait and see what these political parties actually do in the next year, where that's when we'll really see their agenda being set forward. So while I've been a bit negative this podcast, let's be a little more optimistic and say, you know, while it looks like it could be bad, we'll actually have to wait and see what happens. Because it is potential that the Greens might be willing to accept that things won't be able to happen at their desired pace. Potentially, if they're also wanting to remain in power after the next election. So there's potential hope, but we'll have to wait and see what actually happens on. Because, you know, it's hard to say, because based off of von der Leyen's statements during the election, we would have potentially thought that she would have been more willing to work with different parties like Maloney, while then in the end ended up not being too as much. But it's also partly the fault of these different right-wing parties themselves, where because they have their own differences, where some are against Russia now, while others still necessarily aren't against Russia, such as Orban, unfortunately. You then have this fracturing where they could have a lot more sway in the European Union Parliament than they end up having, because you have multiple right-wing groups who can't at least come together and say, okay, let's come together based off of these main issues, working on immigration, working on improving the economy, etc., and pushing aside some political differences, which we need politicians to do in order to come to compromises on legislation for the benefit of citizens, but they're not willing to. So we also have to blame them and say, well, they could have had potentially more power in these negotiations, but they remain so fractured that this is also on them.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I really think that the European regarding the migration and integration, the European Union strategy on immigration was wrong, because has faced significant criticism for being both ineffective and fragmented. And one major issue has been the lack of a cohesive, unified approach among member states and countries. As you mentioned, countries on the EU's external border, like Italy or Greece, have borne the brunt of incoming migrants and asylum seekers, while other member states have been reluctant the share of burden. This this has led to a patchwork of national policies rather than
Well,
a
yes and no,
wide
because it
strategy.
ends up biting them in the end. Because while they originally arrive in Greece and Italy, luckily for Greece and Italy, because of the fact that because of their own economic crisis, they were never, for the past 20 years, really able to offer large benefits to illegal immigrants. So for these member states who refuse to take any action, they get to deal with the problem because a lot of these illegal immigrants then make their way to France, Sweden, Germany,
Yeah.
or potentially across the channel into the United Kingdom, which is no longer a member state. So the EU, of course, doesn't really care as much protecting the UK because, hey, you left the EU, not our problem.
Yeah, and
So good for Italy and Greece, but considering that they want something to be done, member states like France, Germany, Sweden refuse to work to get a strategy, then they end up having to deal with the problem in the long run because they get the burden then.
yeah,
But
right.
to be fair, though, it almost seems like crossings are down to Europe because immigrants are realizing, oh, I'm not able to get away with as much in Europe because luckily you're seeing Europeans fighting back. When you're having people try to, there was a perfect video from France where
Yeah.
you had this Arab teenager try to start a fight with a Frenchman. Frenchman punches him square in the face.
Yeah.
And then he gets so shocked, runs away, and you're having these people realize, no, we can't intimidate the Europeans anymore. And unfortunately for my own nation, because we have Joe Biden who gets lost on stage, doesn't know where he is, and with his refusal to close the border, we're having millions pour into the United States where they're realizing, okay, now's our chance to go to the United States, while you're seeing countries like the Netherlands
Yeah.
say, absolutely not, we've had enough. And you're seeing citizens starting to rise up, defending themselves from different attacks.
Yeah,
People are
and this is
realizing, oh, maybe it is better for me to go to the US, where because if you look at it, even though there really hasn't been a successful strategy within the European Union, crossings to Italy are down. And
yeah, and
partly it's because people realize that when you have a government like Maloney, who's not going to be giving out free benefits to people who illegally cross over. The fact that Maloney is also working on the Albania strategy, which I love, because it sends the message, no, if you cross illegally into Italy and you have no proof of asylum, because that's also the other thing,
right.
which I agree with. If you actually have someone who does have a valid claim, they're not going to be transferred to Albania. This main thing is to address people who illegally cross into Italy, have no valid claim. Well, okay, then you're going to be in a detention processing center in Albania, where there is not going to be this possibility of you trying to sneak into other parts of Italy after originally arriving, or also into other EU member states.
Right.
And while the European Union may have this not necessarily be endorsing it, it benefits it because this is also partially what Italy's supposed to do as a Schengen area member state with an external border. And but it's interesting too how partially what may be benefiting Italy is that different people who might have originally tried to cross through Italy, because the realization of how dangerous this route is, how unfortunately at this point you've had thousands lose their lives trying to do that because these criminal organizations who traffic people use vessels that are not seaworthy. We've seen where there's been a rise with Baltic member states, with Finland, with Poland, where they're trying to cross over the land border because reasonably so, as you could imagine, that's much safer than trying to cross over the ocean when people could realize for themselves, well, okay, look at how many thousands died that way, drowning. That's not a pleasant way to die. So instead, it's much safer to try to cross through the land crossing. However, you're seeing those governments really pushing back and not allowing that, closing their borders with Russia or with Belarus in order to. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if people turn back to trying to cross over the Mediterranean, since it's not necessarily successful trying to cross through Belarus or Russia.
Mhm.
That's yet to be seen. But the European Union has to act now. The fact that it seems like that's what's been happening, where people are trying to cross more through land borders. The EU has to act now, though, and also create a Mediterranean Sea strategy, which would definitely be working with North Africa. And unfortunately, you have this unwillingness, as we've mentioned in the previous podcast, where, oh,
Yeah.
well, there's some concerns with democracy. And we could almost compare this to the chicken and the egg. Well, what comes first? Improvement in economic relations that benefit these nations in order to help them to democratize? Or are we really supposed to expect them to democratize in order to create stronger bonds with them?
Yeah, that's a good
And
question.
I love this course that I took with a professor originally from Venezuela in my undergraduate degree, where definitely her view and a lot of data suggests that it's definitely economic growth has to come
Mhm.
first before democratization, because when you're more concerned about meeting your basic needs, such as food, clothing, shelter, how are you supposed to demand democracy from your own government?
Right.
And not
Right.
only that, but the European Union could also work on slowly improving benefits, where then governments realize themselves, oh, okay, well, if we allow certain more freedoms to our own citizens, we'll
Mhm.
continue to have a closer bond with the European Union, have better economic relations, etc., which we'll have to see, because that's also the benefit. And I want to make it clear, I'm not endorsing any political party. And
Right.
unfortunately, I don't know how practical that's going to be if we keep on voting for, well, not we, I can't vote. Uh, if you have European Union citizens who continue to vote for more far right parties, if you have these far right parties who basically, which some of them definitely do, tend to lean more xenophobic, hating anyone who isn't white, unfortunately, I don't necessarily see them motivated to improving relations with North Africa.
Mhm.
So this would definitely be the benefit for the EPP, the S&D, the Greens to get on that now in order to improve their chances the next election. Because if they're able to successfully work with North Africa to build a closer relationship, help decrease migration, they could point out then, okay, do you want to vote for us? Or do you want to vote for political parties that are potentially more isolationist, don't want to work with the Middle East at all, don't want to work with North Africa, and just want to think that they could close themselves off? Which, as we realize, is impossible when different member states do not produce their own energy, do not
Mhm.
produce their own goods, and rely on trade with other nations. So this is the big opportunity that the Greens, the EPP, and the S&D have to realize that they have to take now if they want to stop people from continuing to vote for more far right parties, which we'll have to see if they do.
Yeah.
Hopefully they do. Nothing's for certain. And there's also the risk that they have to act now, because I don't know if you've seen in Egypt how different Egyptians are saying themselves, where there's the issue where, because the nation is facing financial troubles with building the new capital, in order to try to convince the rich to move there, they're
Mhm.
cutting down the trees in Cairo. One, to push people into the new city, making it uncomfortable to remain in Cairo. But then also, as different Egyptians have discussed on social media, they're also concerned that this is also a new government strategy to prevent protests. because which makes sense because if you cut down every tree in the city, which previously helped provide shade, helped lower the temperatures for people on the street level, once you remove any covering, okay, you're not going to go outside though. I
Right.
mean, come on. Let's say, as you mentioned before we started recording the podcast, it's very uncomfortable right now in Romania because of a heat wave,
Yeah.
which, as people commonly talk about, whenever we see these heat waves, we always talk about, well, it's because of hot air being pushed from Africa. Hello, what direction does that include? Egypt. The temperatures are even higher in some of these countries. So if you see Europeans avoiding going out during different hours now, but we don't have governments cutting down trees. In fact, you see different governments trying to put more trees, try to make cities more attractive. Could we imagine what it's like for people in Cairo? And this is the danger, though, that while the EPP, the S&D, and the Greens could try to work with the Egyptian government now before it goes too late, if they don't act now, you might see an even larger crackdown on Egyptians. That's not going to benefit them. And then at the same time, if the Egyptian government becomes that much more authoritarian, well, that's going to mean that the European Union is going to be that much less willing to work with them. So there also has to be this realization of, okay, can we work with them now before things deteriorate too quickly
Yeah.
or not?
So we should action. Um, as we wrap up this episode of the EU Spectator, Nick, it's clear that the European Union is at a pivotal juncture, and the new EU Parliament legislature presents both challenges and opportunities with shifting political power dynamics, broader coalitions, and intricate negotiations, and understanding how the EPP, the S&D, and the Greens will navigate this landscape is crucial for predicting the future or the future direction of the EU policies. And also Ursula von der Leyen's re-election as president of the European Commission has underscored the complexity of the EU politics. Despite her achievements during the first term, she faced significant hurdles, including questions about the democratic integrity in her elections and internal dissent within her own party. How she managed these challenges and build support across parliamentary groups will be critical in determining her effectiveness and in her second term. And also the ongoing debates around migration and integration remain at the heart of the EU's political discourse, and these issues not only shape the re-election negotiations, but will also continue to test the EU's ability to foster unity and uphold its values. Von der Leyen's strategies and policies in this area will be closely watched as indicators of the EU's future direction. Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you all for joining us for this insightful discussion. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis and expert commentary on European affairs. Also, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X to stay updated with the latest news and exclusive content. Your support help us continue to bring you the most relevant and engaging discussion on the EU affairs. Until next time, please stay informed and engage with the EU Spectator. Thank you
And
very
just
much.
to end on a bit of a positive note, feel free to comment with your thoughts. While we've been a bit critical about the ability of this new coalition on being able to solve some of the challenges, It's also important to realize that because it's so early on, there's definitely a lot of room for different surprises, which we've seen before. And we're potentially already seeing from the UK government itself under Labour that while it may have seemed that it was going to go one way, it looks like it could actually be moving in another direction. So while there's some concerns for how well this coalition could work, let's also keep in mind that they also could really surprise us. And
Yeah.
it might actually be better than if it was a different coalition. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Nick, for your thoughts and analysis. And until next time, take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.